Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 34 years old. I work as a network technician at a telecom company, and I live in Flagstaff, Arizona. This story happened in September of last year, and to this day I can't go near forests without feeling a knot in my stomach. At the time I was trying to reconnect a bit with nature, you know. I was going through a stressful period, under a lot of pressure at work, and two colleagues, Jaden from the finance department and Marcus from tech support, and I decided to take a short weekend trip to go camping. We picked Prescott National Forest because it wasn't as crowded as others in the area, and according to Jaden, who swore he knew some shortcuts out there, it had some less explored trails, perfect for anyone looking for peace and quiet. We left on a Friday afternoon and drove to a secluded clearing that Jaden knew. The place was beautiful, somewhat isolated, but with an incredible view of the mountains. We set up our tent near some tall pine trees, left the car parked in a patch of dirt, and started exploring the area with flashlights and light backpacks. Around 4 in the afternoon, after about 40 minutes of aimless wandering through the woods, we found a strange structure in the middle of the brush. It looked like an improvised shack made from sheets of metal and plywood, covered with a faded blue tarp that was torn in one corner. The smell there. Man, it was a mix of old gasoline and something chemical and sour that stung your nostrils. And there was stuff inside. Used syringes, jars with dark liquid, a filthy microwave hooked up to a battery, and stains on the floor that I'd rather believe were rust. Jaden was the first to step inside, pushing open the makeshift door with his flashlight like he was some movie detective. Marcus and I hung back, feeling uneasy, but curiosity eventually won out. In one corner of the space there was an old mattress covered with a threadbare sheet and a ripped backpack tossed beside it. Inside the backpack we found some moldy clothes, a half-wet pack of cigarettes, and a notebook. The pages were partly faded, but you could make out things like D45, do not mix with V6, and, stranger still, don't leave it on at night. Marcus, always the skeptic, figured it was just some junkie or tweaker who had set the place up for personal use. But I'd had a bad feeling since the moment we arrived. That place didn't seem like it had been abandoned for very long. We got back to the campsite before dark, with an odd silence hanging over the group. No one talked much about what we'd seen, but you could tell we were all uneasy. We made a fire, fixed some sandwiches, and tried to stick to the plan of enjoying the night with beer and small talk, but the vibe wasn't the same. Around 10, Jaden mentioned he thought he saw a flashlight between the trees, in the direction we'd come from. We laughed it off nervously, saying it was probably a reflection or just his imagination, but deep down, none of us really ruled it out. At midnight, when I went to the car to grab a sweater, I noticed the passenger side mirror was dangling, like someone had kicked it or hit it with something heavy. And worse, there were dirty, mud-covered handprints on the body of the car, like someone had pressed their face against the window trying to look inside. I ran back to the campsite trying to look calm, but my mind was racing. When I told the guys about the car, Jaden got up immediately, grabbed a flashlight, and went to check it out. Marcus just stood there, staring into the darkness like he was expecting someone to appear between the trees. When Jaden came back, he was pale. He said that besides the handprints, there was a tear in the extra tent tarp we had left folded near the back of the car. That wasn't animal damage. It was made by someone. Someone had been there. And the worst part, while we were talking, we heard a sharp noise coming from somewhere in the woods, like a branch being snapped with force. We pointed our flashlights, but saw nothing. Just silence. Thick, in a way that felt almost artificial. The night dragged on in slow motion. Every minute felt longer than the last. None of us slept. The three of us just sat around the fire, which was now more embers than flame, listening to the sounds of the forest and trying to pretend it was all just group paranoia. Around 3 in the morning, Marcus stood up saying he was going to take a quick walk to clear his head. I tried to argue, but he just waved me off and disappeared among the pines with his flashlight. 10 minutes passed, then 15, 20. We called out, shouted, blew a whistle. Nothing. Jaden and I set out to look for him, following his tracks on the ground until they faded near a slope covered in leaves. The only thing we found was Marcus's flashlight, lying on the ground near a log, still on, illuminating a pair of footprints, and some deeper marks beside them, like someone had been dragged. That's when the real panic hit. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, the kind of thudding that makes you think you're about to pass out. Jaden was shaking, gripping the flashlight with both hands, softly repeating Marcus's name, like he might just appear out of the woods if he heard us. But the silence was absolute. We ran back to the camp and locked ourselves inside the car, even with the broken mirror hanging loose. We stayed in there, waiting for the sun to rise, and I swear to God, I saw someone standing between the trees at 4:17 a.m. I wrote down the time on my phone because it was the most terrifying moment of my life. The figure was tall, thin, looked like they were wearing some kind of hood. They didn't move, just stood there like they knew we were watching. As soon as daylight came, we decided to get out of there as fast as we could. We tossed everything into the trunk and drove off roughly, since the back tire had been slashed, and we had to go slow on the spare. But just before we got to the dirt road that leads to the highway, we found something that made our blood run cold. Marcus's watch, that digital one with the red strap he always wore, was carefully placed on a log by the side of the trail. Next to it, a large rock with a dark stain, probably blood, and a piece of electrical tape on the ground like someone had wrapped something and dropped it. There was no body, no tracks, just those items, arranged like some kind of warning. Jaden started crying. I froze. It was like someone was making it clear. You saw too much. We drove back to Flagstaff in the heaviest silence I've ever experienced with another human being. Each of us in our own corner, trying to process what it all meant. We called the police as soon as we got back, of course. Filed a report, told them everything, showed them the photos of the place, the watch, the rock. And what did they say? That Marcus probably got lost. That it could have been an animal, that we were shaken and maybe overinterpreting natural signs. I wanted to scream. Show them the marks on the car, the dragged footprints, the watch placed like part of a ritual. But the detective seemed more interested in wrapping up his shift than in taking seriously what we'd been through. They logged it as a non-suspicious disappearance, and that was it. End of protocol. No helicopter search, no task force. Just a warning. If he gets in touch again, let us know. The worst part came 2 days later when I got a message from Marcus's phone. It was just a photo. Dark, with the glow of a car dashboard screen reflecting off a face partially hidden behind the driver's seat. The face was Jaden's, and the picture had been taken from inside the car. Same clothes he was wearing on the night of the camping trip. The same blue jacket. But the problem was, both of us were inside the car at that moment, locked in, together, and no one else was with us. I went through the image on my phone, checked metadata, location data. Nothing. No record of where or when it had been taken. The number went straight to voicemail. The police? Once again, probably just a prank. Internet scam, number cloning. But we knew. That was a warning. We shouldn't have gone into that place. After that, Jaden went into a downward spiral, took a leave from work, stopped replying to messages, and completely isolated himself. I tried reaching out, but he blocked me on everything. The last thing he ever said to me by text was, "They know where I live." I never saw him again. I heard rumors that he moved to another state, that he's living in a trailer somewhere in California, but no one can confirm. As for me, I sold the car a week later. Not because of the damage, but because I couldn't get in it without checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone sitting in the back seat. Every creak, every sound in the garage at night made me get out of bed with a lump in my throat. And worse, I started getting messages too, always from different numbers. No text, just blurry photos of forests, torn tents, and one that chilled me to the bone. My own house seen from a distance with the curtain of my bedroom window slightly open. I tried going back to a normal life. I stayed away from hiking trails, turned off notifications, changed my number. But there's one thing I've never been able to forget. The last message I received, already with the new phone, was a photo, a selfie. Marcus, dirty, his face bruised, his eyes wide open like he was being forced to smile. Behind him, In the background of the image, you could clearly see the metal shack where it all began, and a shadow behind him, tall, motionless. After that, the number vanished, and I never got another lead. I don't know if he's alive, if he was coerced, if he got involved in something we were never meant to stumble upon. But one thing I do know for sure, that forest is not just a protected area. There are people in there. People who live in the shadows, who watch, who make a point of not being found, and who will do anything to stay invisible. Story 2. My name is Lucas Montenegro. I'm 28 years old, and even though I work as a graphic designer today, my true passion has always been photography, especially landscapes. In recent years, it became more than just a hobby. It was my way of escaping the routine. In June of 2022, my best friend Rodrigo and I decided to go on a 3-day expedition along a lesser-known stretch of the El Rito Trail in northern New Mexico. The trail didn't show up on most maps, but we knew it was accessible through an old, deactivated entry point, and it seemed perfect to capture some exclusive images of canyons and rare rock formations. Rodrigo also knew a lot about drones, so we brought all the gear: DSLR cameras, tripods, a backpack full of batteries, and 2 drones with good flight autonomy. We arrived on a Thursday afternoon and camped near a natural clearing, far from any main roads. The first day was peaceful, clear skies, total silence, and that good kind of isolation vibe. But it was on the second day that things started to get strange. While exploring a denser slope, we found the first weird thing: a trail of fresh footprints that didn't match any common type of footwear. They were narrow marks, almost like military boots, but the strangest part was the pattern. They were perfectly spaced, as if the person had been marching. We followed them out of curiosity, and about 300 meters ahead we saw something camouflaged among the bushes. A metal box with a circular hole on top. It was some kind of sensor, and next to it, there was a trail camera very well hidden, pointing in the direction we had come from. No official markings, no signs, no explanation. We were kind of speechless at that point. I even tried to convince Rodrigo that it could have been equipment from some kind of researcher, like for wildlife monitoring. But he immediately shut that down, saying that thing wasn't standard. He had interned at a reserve in Durango and recognized that kind of sensor. It was used in tactical operations, not in environmental studies. What made us even more uncomfortable was that, just a few meters away, we found a camo tarp covering a kind of makeshift shelter. It was small, barely big enough for someone to lie inside, but it was clearly being used. There was a half-full water bottle, a half-eaten granola bar, and a dirty rag. It looked like someone had left in a hurry, or was watching us from somewhere very close by. I remember getting that cold shiver, you know, like someone was right behind us. But there was no sound, no movement, just presence. We decided to turn back and head for camp, but the vibe had completely changed. The forest, which the day before had felt welcoming, now felt suffocating, tight, like it was pushing us out. When night fell, we sat in silence, reacting to every small twig snap like it was a threat. And then came the cherry on top. Around 2 in the morning, a low buzzing sound started approaching. It wasn't an insect noise. It was electronic. When I stepped out of the tent, I saw it. A drone hovering about 4 meters up. A red light blinking in the center like an iris watching. There was no wind, no sound of rotors. Just that hum, and the overwhelming feeling that someone was behind it, watching everything we were doing. When Rodrigo pointed the flashlight at it, the drone shot straight up and vanished into the darkness without making a sound. After that, it was clear we weren't alone out there. It wasn't just paranoia, someone really was watching us. The next morning, we packed up in a hurry, decided to cut the hike short, and took an alternate route back, a detour that passed through a more open area before reaching the road. But it was on that stretch that we found something I'll never forget. On the left side of the trail, half hidden among some rocks, there was a small clearing with what looked like graves. Not crosses or anything like that. Just freshly turned mounds of earth, with stones piled on top and small wooden markers stuck into the ground, like someone had tried to label them. Rodrigo got closer and saw that one of the markers had hand-carved letters, RC 0321. Another read, DF 0720. It looked like an improvised cemetery. No fence, No last names, just initials and dates. I wanted to get out of there immediately, but Rodrigo snapped a few quick photos, saying it needed to be reported. He seemed determined, but you could see the fear on his face. The kind of fear that isn't just about what you've already seen, but about what you haven't seen yet. We started walking faster, now constantly checking over our shoulders, and that's when we heard voices, very faint, coming from a spot to our left. They weren't shouts or regular conversation. They were whispers, like someone trying to communicate without being heard. The forest was dead silent, so any noise felt amplified. We stopped, turned off our flashlight, and stood still. About 10 seconds later, we heard the snap of a dry branch being stepped on, and further ahead, 2 red dots, low, close to the ground, like eyes reflecting, but it wasn't an animal. The dots were blinking in sync. Another drone. At that point, running felt pointless. The forest around us was thick, and stepping off the trail meant getting lost. But staying on the path also felt insane, since everything suggested we were walking straight into someone's territory. Rodrigo pulled out his phone to check for signal. Nothing. Not a single bar. No network. Not even enough to send an SOS. He then suggested something that honestly seemed insane to me at the time. Cut through the woods, cross the rocky area, and try to reach higher ground where we might pick up a signal. I agreed only because it was either that or keep being tracked. We walked in a straight line for over an hour, following offline GPS coordinates, hopping over rocks, dodging cacti and trying not to make noise. Then, in a more open patch, we saw something that froze my blood. Another camouflaged shelter, but this time larger, with antennas. It looked like a micro base, not military, at least not officially. There were 2 structures set up with solar panels, a water barrel, and what looked like a portable computer inside a semi-open tent. The most disturbing part? No one was there. Nothing. No sound, no recent signs of movement. But everything was running. The panels were active, the screens flickering with data. Rodrigo, ever the bold one, approached to take a picture, but before he could even touch the equipment, a blaring alarm went off, shrill and piercing like we had entered a restricted zone. We bolted without looking back, and as we ran I clearly heard a sharp crack. A gunshot. The bullet passed so close to my shoulder that I felt the heat and the sound tearing through the air. It wasn't a warning. Someone genuinely didn't want us to leave that place alive. We ran for over 20 minutes without stopping, tripping over roots, slipping on loose rocks, our lungs burning and adrenaline maxed out. I lost one of my shoes somewhere along the way and kept going with one bare foot, cutting it up, but I didn't even notice at the time. I just wanted out of there. When we finally found a higher rock formation, we climbed as far as we could, and at the top, Rodrigo held up his phone. 1 bar. 1 single miserable signal bar. He managed to send a text with our location to his brother, asking for help. We stayed there, hidden behind a large rock, waiting for anything, praying someone would answer. And then, silence. A thick, heavy silence. And in the middle of that silence, a faint metallic noise, like someone adjusting something nearby. You could hear the click of a tripod, the hum of a small motor. That's when we saw the 3rd drone. But this one was different. It had a mount underneath, like a small mechanical claw. It hovered about 5 meters from us, stayed still for a few seconds, definitely filming, and then began slowly descending directly toward Rodrigo. He grabbed a rock and threw it at the drone with all his strength. He hit it. One of the rotors burst, sparks flew, and the thing spiraled down into the brush. We didn't stick around to see the damage. We scrambled down the other side of the rise and headed straight until we hit a dirt road. And by some miracle, there was an old, beat-up car parked there. A local hunter, an older man, worn-out cap, unfriendly face. We didn't even have to explain much, just asked for a ride to the nearest station. He looked us up and down and said, "You're not the first ones to come out of there like this. Should have listened to the warnings." And without another word, he took us. When we got to the station, we were finally able to call the police and report what we'd seen. We showed them the photos of the makeshift graves, the camouflaged shelters, the drones. But as you might imagine, nothing came of it. The local sheriff looked at the images with a bored expression and said that area was no man's land, not regularly patrolled, and that it was probably some group of illegal hunters or paranoid survivalists. Rodrigo tried to press him, especially about the gunshot, but the guy just replied, "If no one got hit, there's nothing I can do." I remember sitting there, my feet still bleeding from the cuts, listening to that and thinking, we could have died out there, and it wouldn't even make the news. The sheriff just advised us not to go back there, and next time, to let someone in the family know before heading into a crazy trail. Rodrigo deleted all the drone photos after that day. Said he felt like the files were being tracked. I kept a few on an external hard drive, but I've never opened them again. And you know what's worse? 2 months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside, there was just a single printed page with an image. It was a photo of me and Rodrigo sleeping in the tent. The same night we saw the first drone. The photo had been taken from above, at a perfect angle. The camera had been right above the tent, at the exact center of the tarp. To this day, I don't know who took that picture, but I got the message. That forest has owners, and they don't want to be found. Story 3. My name is Eric Vasquez. I'm 31 years old, and this story happened last summer, during what was supposed to be a peaceful camping trip with my childhood friends. We've known each other since high school. Me, Tiago, and Leo. Every year since we turned 25, we take a weekend to disconnect from the world. This time we chose a patch of BLM, Bureau of Land Management land near the Nevada-Arizona border. The area was remote, with no cell signal and very few official trails, making it perfect for camping far away from noise, people, or any kind of distraction. Just nature and us. We arrived Friday afternoon in Leo's car, packed with supplies, new tents, flashlights, and that men in the wild spirit only people who've camped in the middle of nowhere truly get. On Saturday morning, Tiago said he was going to take a short solo hike, just to explore the northern ridge. He was always the most adventurous of the group, kind of a dreamer, you know. We told him to take a radio, but he laughed and said, 3 hours and I'll be back with amazing photos and maybe a twisted ankle. It was around 9 a.m. When noon came and he hadn't returned, we started getting uneasy. By 2 p.m., Leo was already shouting his name into the forest, and I climbed a rock trying to get a signal. Nothing. As the sun began to set and the temperature dropped, I felt that real kind of fear. The kind that doesn't have a shape, but hangs heavy in the air. He never just disappeared like that. Never. We stayed up all night, taking turns with the flashlights on, calling his name every now and then, trying to hear anything besides the sound of the breeze in the branches. Leo paced in circles, anxious, while I tried to think rationally. At 5 in the morning, with the sky still a deep blue, we decided to follow the trail Tiago had probably taken toward the ridge. That's when we found the first sign. Just past a bend in the path, there was a large rock with a dark stain that didn't look like dirt. It was thick and already dried, but the color looked a lot like blood. And on a log, less than 2 meters away, was Tiago's watch. A black Casio with a scratched strap, the one he'd worn since college. It was clean, neatly placed, as if someone had put it there on purpose. That scene didn't make sense. If he had fallen or gotten hurt, why would he leave his watch so perfectly positioned? And where was his backpack? The footprints disappeared just a few meters ahead, like they'd been wiped away. We went back to camp even more nervous and started packing up to leave and get help. The dirt road leading out was terrible, full of potholes, but we managed to reach a gas station nearly 40 minutes away, where we finally got a signal and called the local police. They listened to our story, took down the details, and asked a few basic questions. Then they said accidents out there were common: slippery mountains, wild animals, people going off trail and never being seen again. The official search lasted 2 days. Search dogs, drones, volunteers. Nothing. It was like Tiago had vanished into thin air. 3 days after we got back to the city, still trying to process the grief and frustration, my phone buzzed at 2 in the morning. It was a message from Tiago's number. I froze for a few seconds before opening it. It was a photo. Dark, blurry, but it was clear it had been taken from inside a car. The detail that made me drop my phone immediately was recognizing the interior. It was Leo's car. The passenger seat, with Tiago's blue backpack thrown on the floor, and in the background, the clear outline of Leo's head in the driver's seat. That photo had been taken from inside the car, but not by either of us. I woke Leo up immediately. He had also received the same image minutes earlier. We looked at each other, both with that gut feeling that something had been wrong from the very beginning. The next day, we took the phone to the police station. The detective looked at the photo, asked if we were sure it was Leo's car, and in the end said that phones that go missing often end up in the wrong hands and get used for this kind of thing. But this wasn't a scam. It was personal, because more messages started coming in. First, an audio recording. It was hard to make out, full of static, but there was heavy breathing, and a faint voice saying, "They took me from here." It was Tiago's voice. The second recording was worse. The creaking of wood, and something metallic being dragged. Then silence. And then, as if it were a final reminder, another image. This time of our tent, exactly how it looked the morning we left, but taken from the outside, in the dawn light, and with a shadow of someone watching. At that point, I couldn't sleep anymore. I started leaving all the lights in my apartment on at night and checking the locks on my door 5 times before lying down. Leo, who had always been the skeptic, was visibly shaken. He even stopped driving the car for a few days, saying he felt like someone else had sat there last, not him. We started going through all the photos and videos we took during the trip, trying to find any detail that might explain all of this. A blur, a presence, anything we hadn't noticed before. And in one of the photos Leo had taken of the canyon on the second day, barely noticeable in the bottom right corner, there was a silhouette. Someone crouched behind a rock, too small to be an animal. Still, staring straight at the camera. We took that image to the police too. The same detective handling our case went silent for a few seconds after seeing the photo, then cleared his throat and said it was probably one of the search volunteers. But that shot was taken before Tiago disappeared. There was no one else out there but the 3 of us. No volunteers, no forest rangers, no one. The scariest part? After showing him that photo, we never managed to reach the detective again. He had been transferred to another department, according to the receptionist at the precinct. And soon after, Tiago's case was officially closed as probable accidental death, body not recovered. As if a human being could just vanish, leaving behind carefully placed clues, scheduled messages, and photos from inside a locked car. We knew someone was still out there, maybe had always been out there. A few weeks later, I got a message from Leo in the middle of the night. He was drunk, clearly distressed, and said he couldn't stand living with that feeling anymore. When I called, it went straight to voicemail. The next day, I tried calling several times. Nothing. I went to his apartment, knocked on the door for almost 10 minutes. No answer. I called his parents, mutual friends. No one knew anything. He had simply vanished. 2 days later, I received a box at the door of my building, with no return address. Inside, there was just one thing: Leo's phone. When I turned it on, there was only one item saved in the gallery: a recent photo of the same clearing where we had camped, taken from a distance. And in the center of the image, something that nearly made me throw up. Leo standing still, shirtless, head bowed, hands behind his back. And behind him, someone in a dark hood, face completely covered, holding what looked like a rope. I didn't go to the police. I didn't call anyone. I deleted the photo, changed my number, and the next day I packed my things and moved to another state. Maybe it was cowardice. Maybe. But everything inside me was screaming that if I stayed there one more day, I'd be next. And to this day, sometimes I get calls from random numbers in the middle of the night. I never answer, but every time I hear that ringtone, my hands start to sweat. Because deep down I know, that place wasn't just a remote trail. It was a collection point, an observation post, a hunting ground, and we were the bait that got away. Or maybe just a small part of a bigger game we never understood. If you have a friend who disappeared while camping around there, don't accept that it was just an accident. It wasn't. Story 4. My name is Renan Ferraz. I'm 37 years old, and I'm the kind of person who prefers the silence of the trail over the noise of the city. After a complicated divorce and years of non-stop work, I decided to take some time for myself. I took a leave from my job and went off the grid for 2 weeks. Just me and my backpack, walking through the lesser-known trails of southern Utah. No rush, no GPS, just topographic maps and an emergency radio. I'd already hiked through Zion and Bryce before, But this time I wanted to go further, deeper. I ended up near a barely documented area around Fish Lake National Forest, a secluded place, with old paths and very little human interference. It was paradise, until it became a nightmare. On the fourth day of hiking, already a good 25 kilometers from the nearest town, I ran into a guy right in the middle of the trail. He was barefoot, his shirt was torn, completely filthy, and he had that look of someone who hadn't slept in days. It wasn't common to run into anyone out there, so my first reaction was to ask if he was okay. He froze for a few seconds, looking at me like he was trying to decide if I was a threat. Then he whispered, almost without strength, "They're after me." I laughed, thinking he might have taken something or was just delirious from dehydration. But when he grabbed my arm tightly and said, "They don't let anyone leave," I heard the truth in his voice. It wasn't paranoia. It was real fear. His name was Nathan. He looked like he was in his early 30s, unshaven, with a fresh cut on his forehead that looked like it had been made with something sharp. As we walked together, he slowly told me what had happened. He said he'd been riding his motorcycle through the backcountry when he decided to camp in a remote area of the forest. There, he stumbled upon a strange group, people who lived off-grid, away from society, but not like hippies or nature lovers. They were militiamen, according to him, armed survivalists with their own rules, their own punishments. He had accidentally come across their camp and was captured. Spent 5 days imprisoned in a makeshift tent, from which he escaped in the middle of the night after one of the guards fell asleep. As he told me all of this, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was exaggerating. Maybe it was just a group of overly intense hunters. But then we started walking back along the trail I had taken the day before, and something was off. Seriously off. Every single marker I'd left behind, small strips of fabric tied to trees, stacked gravel, even knife marks on tree trunks, was gone, one by one, as if someone had come behind me and erased any trace of my path. Nathan went pale. He said this was what they did. They erased trails to disorient people, that if you escaped, they'd let you wander until you were exhausted, and then they'd come for you. That's when it hit me. They already knew I was there, and now I was a problem too. The forest started to change after that. What once felt like pure nature now seemed like a closed labyrinth. The trees felt closer, the silence heavier, and every sound, a falling leaf, a distant snap, felt like a warning. We hiked for over an hour trying to make it back to a spot where I remembered getting a radio signal, but it was like the trail itself was playing tricks on us. At one point, we passed a fallen tree I was sure I'd already seen. 20 minutes later, we saw it again. It was impossible. I started wondering if we were walking in circles or if someone was actually manipulating the terrain. Nathan said they used natural markers and coded symbols on the trees, that they knew how to bend paths without anyone noticing. He was starting to panic, and so was I. That's when we saw the first shadow. It was distant, but unmistakable. A figure standing still at the top of a slope, watching. Motionless as if it were part of the landscape, but you could tell it was someone. You couldn't make out the face, but it looked like they were wearing some kind of vest, something military. When we pointed the flashlight in their direction, the figure simply vanished. Didn't run, didn't duck, just disappeared like it had crouched and melted into the brush in a single trained motion. We didn't say a word after that. We just started running. Nathan said their camp was about 3 kilometers from there, and that if we cut across the ridge and avoided the main trails, we might make it. But the deeper we went, the more it felt like the forest was swallowing us whole. The daylight began to fade, and with it the feeling that we still had any chance left. Once night fully set in, the forest became outright hostile. It was like all the trees had closed in around us, muffling every sound except our own breathing. Nathan suggested we hide until morning. Continuing to move in the dark would only make us easy targets. We found a small recess under a rock formation, crouched down, and turned off our flashlights. The plan was to stay absolutely silent, just wait for the light to return. But sometime in the middle of the night we heard it. It wasn't an animal. It was someone, or multiple people, walking slowly, deliberately, no more than 15 meters from where we were hidden. They had weak red flashlights barely lighting the ground, like they already knew exactly where they were going. They passed by us like they were tracking, sniffing the path, slow and methodical. And then they stopped. I didn't breathe. My chest hurt from holding in the air so long. Nathan next to me was visibly shaking. One of the men pointed his dim flashlight in our direction, but didn't come close to where we were. Instead, he crouched down and left something on the ground. After a few more minutes of standing still, the footsteps began to fade, and the forest returned to its suffocating silence. We waited another hour before leaving our hiding spot. We went to the spot where they had stopped, and there, on a rock, was a symbol drawn in charcoal or soot, a circle with an X in the middle. Beside it, a torn strip of red cloth, just like the ones Nathan said the members used to identify themselves. It was a warning. They knew where we were. They had just decided not to act at that moment. Maybe for fun. Maybe because it was still too early for whatever they had in mind. As soon as the sun began to rise, we got out of there as fast as we could. No talking, no thinking, just walking. Nathan recognized a stretch of rocky terrain he remembered crossing during his previous escape, and we followed it, ignoring trails and trying to keep a straight line. It wasn't until around noon that we heard a familiar sound. An engine. An old Jeep, the kind used by rescue and forest maintenance teams, appeared at the bottom of a slope. The driver was a forest ranger, solitary, with a graying beard and a stern face. When he saw us, he stopped, lowered his sunglasses and said, "You came from in there?" I just nodded. Nathan dropped to his knees, exhausted. The ranger didn't ask any more questions. He told us to get in and drove in silence to the nearest station, where we called the police. The strangest part was the ranger's own behavior. When we tried to explain what we had seen, the people, the symbols, the erased tracks, he just said, "I've heard stories like that before. You were lucky," and changed the subject. The police listened, took notes, promised to open a report, but as far as I know, they never carried out a search. They never even asked again about Nathan, who disappeared 2 days after giving me a ride to the city. Vanished, without a trace. I only found out because I tried calling him to say thanks, and his number was already disconnected. I never saw or heard from him again. Since then, I've never entered a forest alone again, never trusted any trail, and every time I see some unusual mark on a tree, I can't help but wonder if it's just a hunter's sign, or the first warning that someone in there is still watching and choosing who gets to leave. Story 5. My name is Andre. I'm 33 years old, and before this happened, I was the kind of guy who loved solo road trips, blasting music and stopping anywhere that felt peaceful. Nothing made me happier than setting up my tent, cooking instant noodles on a camp stove, and falling asleep to the sound of crickets. I work in IT, and whenever I take a few days off, I like to explore places off the tourist map. In October of 2022, I decided to do a route through the interior of Arizona up to northern Nevada, passing through small towns, lesser-known trails, and open BLM areas. It was a short trip, just me and my car, an SUV adapted for sleeping inside, with a mattress, curtains, and space for gear. On the third night, I parked in a remote rest area, deep in a forested stretch that looked completely abandoned. I arrived around sunset, and the atmosphere was beautiful. Orange leaves covering the ground, a silence broken only by a lone crow circling nearby. I set everything up calmly, organized the back seat, kept the cooler within reach, and made a small dinner. It was one of those moments of complete peace. No cell signal, which made it even better. Around 11 p.m., already lying inside the car with the curtain drawn, I started dozing off while listening to a downloaded podcast on my phone. And it was in that space between sleep and awareness that I heard, very clearly right outside the window, my mother's voice. "Andre, please, help me." That weak, tearful voice. Exactly like how she sounded when she was sick. But my mother lives in another state, and I was alone, in the middle of nowhere. In that moment, I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the pulse in my neck. I didn't move a muscle trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe just some weird audio fragment from the podcast that coincidentally matched. But then I heard it again. "Andre, please. It's so dark here." This time, closer. The voice was coming from the side of the car, exactly where the rear door window was. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't a generic voice. It was my mother's, with her intonation, her pauses, and that whisper she used when she wanted to wake me gently. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I opened a sliver of the curtain, just enough to peek outside, and saw no one. Just the still forest, covered in dew. I thought about getting out of the car, but something held me back. A deep primal fear, like any step outside would put me in danger. Instead, I locked the doors, turned off my phone, and curled up in the seat, trying to shut out whatever that was. That's when the voice changed. "You're not coming?" It was still my mother's voice, but now flatter, mechanical, emotionless, like someone was mimicking her, or worse, replaying her. A recording. It hit me like a punch. This wasn't supernatural. It was technology. Someone out there, in the middle of nowhere, was trying to lure me, using my mother's voice. And they knew exactly how she talked to me. I stayed frozen for nearly an hour, drenched in sweat, eyes locked on the curtain, waiting for any movement. The voice stopped, but the silence that followed was even more disturbing. No wind, no insects, just that complete stillness, like the world was holding its breath along with me. When the sky started to lighten around 5 in the morning, I decided to step out of the car and take a look. Every step outside felt wrong. I walked slowly around the car, checking the bushes, the branches, the ground. And that's when I saw it. Between 2 trees, something partially covered with leaves and dirt. I crouched and carefully cleared it away. It was a black box about the size of a car battery. Next to it, wires and a small speaker taped to a branch with electrical tape. That was all I needed to confirm everything. It was an audio playback system, like the ones used in theater sound design. It even had a memory card inserted. And a little further ahead, I found another one, a second box. This one pointed toward the opposite side of the car, as if someone wanted to surround the sound, create a sense of presence. I stood there staring at the equipment, and the only thing I could think was, who would do this? Who brings a setup like that into the middle of the woods? Who records a stranger's mother's voice and tries to lure him outside in the middle of the night? There was only one possible answer. Someone who knew exactly who I was, and what would make me vulnerable. I started searching the area in a mix of fear and anger, trying to grasp the scope of what I had stumbled into. And that's when I found what really chilled me: a camera. It wasn't a trail cam, the kind used for tracking wildlife. It was a small camera, hidden in the trunk of a tree, aimed directly at my car. It had a wide-angle lens and was taped in place with black electrical tape, well camouflaged. I shut it off immediately, shaking. I took a few steps back and started noticing more things. Fresh marks on the ground, footprints hastily smudged, broken branches in linear patterns. This whole setup was deliberate. This wasn't random, and I definitely wasn't chosen by chance. I started thinking about how it was even possible for someone to know I'd stopped there. The spot was remote, and I had chosen it on the fly. Was my car being tracked? I ran back to the vehicle, slammed the door shut, and started the engine without a second thought. I drove straight for almost 2 hours until I reached a small town with a gas station and cell service. I called my mom just to hear her voice and make sure she was okay. And she was, of course, sound asleep, with no idea of what had happened. Then I went to the town's police station. I showed them the photos and told them everything. The officer listened with the expression of someone who'd heard something like it before. He wasn't surprised. He told me that sometimes, some people do that kind of thing for sport, that there are folks living in those areas who enjoy messing with campers. But when I mentioned the voice of my mother, he went quiet. He just said, "They pick what scares people the most, and you were lucky you didn't step outside." After that, I started rethinking the entire lifestyle I had. I sold the converted SUV, gave up solo trips, and started telling people exactly where I was going, even if it was just a run to the store. I became paranoid about tracking, about my phone's microphone, about any device that could be used to capture my voice. To this day, I have no idea how they recorded my mom. Maybe they intercepted a call. Maybe they used AI. Who knows? But whatever the method, someone had studied me. Someone had staged an entire production in the middle of the forest just to break me emotionally. And it would have worked if I had taken one more step, if I had opened the door. 2 months later, I received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single printed photo. It was my car, in that same rest area. But the image had been taken from above, as if by a drone. You could clearly see the outline of my body inside the car, lying down, and the flashlight I had used still on. In the bottom corner of the photo, written in pen, "You're stronger than most." I don't know what that means. I don't know if it was a message of retreat or a veiled threat. But since then, I've never traveled alone again. And if you, by any chance, are thinking about camping in a place with no signal, far from everything, do yourself a favor. Ignore any voice you recognize out there, because maybe it's not asking for help. Maybe it's leading you straight into the trap. Story 6. My name is Marcelo Torres. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent the last few months renovating an old house I inherited from my grandfather, all by myself, in a tiny village deep in rural Oregon. The place is about 40 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by dense woods and down a dirt road that doesn't even show up on Google Maps. The house had been abandoned since 2007, after my grandfather died, and no one had set foot in it since. I decided to turn it into a little vacation retreat, maybe rent it out short-term later. I like being alone, working with wood, playing ambient music, and forgetting about the world. That was the ideal plan. But that was before things started to get wrong. In the 3rd week there, an ordinary night became my breaking point. I was finishing the installation of some shelves in the living room when I heard a voice coming from outside the house. Low, muffled, sounding like it came from the edge of the forest. At first, I thought it was someone passing by on the road, maybe a distant neighbor. But when I paid attention, my blood ran cold. It was my voice. Exactly the same. Same speech rhythm, same tone. And it was saying something I had never said out loud in my life. "You shouldn't have come back." I dropped the drill immediately. I didn't go to the window, I didn't go to the door. I just stood there trembling, with the clear feeling that if I went outside to look, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion. I wasn't sleeping well, eating whatever, living off coffee and sawdust. Maybe my mind was playing tricks, but things only got worse. The following night, I turned everything off and went to bed early, trying to forget the whole thing. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of creaking wood, someone walking on the front deck. I got up slowly, my breath shallow, and peeked through a gap in the curtain. And there he was, or rather me, a man standing about 6 meters from the door, still, motionless, staring directly at the house. He was wearing the exact outfit I had worn 2 days earlier, a gray plaid shirt and old jeans with a tear at the knee. His posture was odd, too stiff, like he was being held up from the inside. I just stood there watching, in shock, until he took a step forward, then another. But he didn't walk naturally. It was slow, almost theatrical. I wanted to run, to hide, but I couldn't stop staring. And then he stopped again, raised his arm, and pointed at me. At that exact second, all the lights in the house flickered, as if there had been a power surge and a sound of static flooded the room, even though everything was turned off. When the lights came back, he was gone. I rushed to lock all the doors, even though I knew it probably wouldn't help. The next morning, I searched the entire property and found no footprints. Just one thing. My plaid shirt, the real one, was hanging from a tree at the edge of the woods, like a trophy. I took the shirt inside and stored it in a box, not knowing what to do. For days, I tried to continue the renovation as if nothing had happened, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I started hearing sounds coming from the forest, snapping branches, muffled whispers, and the strangest of all, recordings of my own voice, saying phrases I recognized from old conversations, things I had said to myself while working alone in the house. Phrases I had never spoken aloud near anyone. That's when I realized someone, or something, had been recording. I installed cameras around the house, motion sensors, everything I could buy in 2 days. And for the first 3 nights, nothing. But on the 4th, the cameras caught it. It was 3:08 a.m. A figure appeared, standing motionless in front of the porch for more than 20 minutes. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like an oversized coat, with the face completely hidden. It didn't move. just stood there. And at the exact moment the front camera lost signal, the side camera picked up another figure emerging from the forest, this time wearing my sneakers, the pair I had thrown out weeks earlier for being soaked and moldy, as if someone had gone after them, as if they were collecting pieces of me. When I took the footage to the nearest town's police station, the officer who watched it stayed silent and then asked, almost casually, "Do you live alone in that house?" I said yes. And without taking his eyes off the screen, he said, "You're not the first to show this kind of thing. It happens more than you think." He told me in a low voice that over the past 2 years, at least 4 residents in the region had reported similar events. Always people living alone, in isolated areas. They all reported hearing their own voices echoing from the forest, seeing figures wearing their clothes, and recordings appearing out of nowhere. One of them even found an exact replica of his wallet lying in the woods, with perfectly copied documents, except the photo, which showed a subtly wrong face, as if someone had tried to imitate him but messed up the eye shape or jaw angle. The officer said all of these people, one by one, had left town and never returned. The strangest part, he added, is that all those houses were sold soon after, by companies no one around here has ever heard of. I went back home with my mind racing. That night I decided that if anything showed up, I'd confront it. I wouldn't sleep, I wouldn't run. I sat in the living room with the lights off and a flashlight in my hand, waiting. And it came. 2:47. Slow knocks on the door. 3 of them. Then silence. When I looked through the peephole, I saw myself. But it wasn't just the clothes or the haircut. It was the expression. He was smiling, but not with his mouth. It was like his whole face had been forced to imitate a human. And right there, for a second that felt eternal, he whispered from the other side of the door, "You're not going to do anything. You know why." I didn't open. I didn't respond. And when the sun rose, he was gone. He left on the ground, carefully folded, my jacket, the one I lost on the first day I arrived. The next day I packed my things and left without looking back. I didn't finish the renovation. I didn't list the house for sale. I simply left it as it was, locked it from the outside, and drove straight to Portland without stopping. Since then, I've been living in a tiny downtown apartment, surrounded by people and noise. Going back to the big city felt like waking up from a coma. But even now, when I hear a strange sound in the hallway, or when my own voice echoes during a work meeting recording, I tense up. I can't listen to recordings of myself without wondering if it was really me who made them. And sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear footsteps in the hall. But there's never anyone there. A month after I fled from that place, I received an envelope. No return address, no postage stamp, just my name, handwritten in the bottom corner. Inside, there was a single photo, me from behind, working on the shelf in the living room of the Oregon house. The date on the image was 2 days before I'd even arrived there for the first time. I don't know who took it. I don't know who delivered it. But ever since then, I can't stop thinking about one thing. Maybe what appeared to me in that forest wasn't a person. Maybe it wasn't a someone. Maybe it was a copy, an attempt, an incomplete version that only needs one thing to become perfect. For you to believe it's real. For you to accept it. For you to open the door.